Your cousin, Vice President Al Gore, has been a willing, even eager advocate of the national security state for many years. What do you think?
Well, my cousin and I have plausible deniability about each other. There are days when I don't acknowledge his existence and days when he doesn't certainly acknowledge mine. He is a perfectly standard Southern Defense Department senator in the Senate. And now all I watch him standing behind Clinton, and his eyes are beginning to sparkle. For a long time, they looked rather dull. And if you notice him, there are times when, I worry about Clinton because Albert is getting closer and closer. He's going to bite one day. He just has a vampire look in his eye. And suddenly there'll be a new administration right on camera. I don't think that administration will be any different from Herbert Hoover, Harry Truman, you name it. Grover Cleveland. No, Grover Cleveland was pretty good about labor unions.
What advice would you give President Clinton about his ongoing problems with the sex scandal surrounding the White House right now, its interns, etc.?
Well, now we get to the point. Thought you'd never ask. His first mistake was the famous 6-hour deposition to Ken Starr, in which asked about Monica, whom I think of. You remember that movie, Play Misty for Me? Oh, there's a girl in there who tries to kill Clint Eastwood, who's a disc jockey. She's mad and looks not unlike Monica. I would be worried about her. His mistake was when asked had he had sexual relations with this enchantress, he should have said his own most famous line, "Don't ask, don't tell." In other words, Judge Starr, none of your damn business. That's what a real president would have done. Can you imagine Abraham Lincoln answering that question? George Washington's sword would be halfway through this pudgy prosecutor. You remember there was an actor called Grady Sutton, a big southern sissy with a big round face. He was always in W.C. Fields movies. He was a wonderful foil for Fields. And Fields finally turned on him one day and said, "Grady, the problem with you is you've got too much of the tomboy in you." Well, I feel that about Ken Starr. There's just too much of the tomboy in him, and he's feeling his oats. And any man who says the First Amendment is about truth should be put away in an institution, preferably the last year of high school, where you are given the Bill of Rights to read. The First Amendment is about telling lies and free speech. Truth doesn't enter into it at all. There was a book not long ago called The Day That America Told the Truth, oxymoronic title, and 94% of our countrymen admitted to being habitual liars. Now, do we want an unrepresentative president? I should say not.
Gore Vidal, you spend nearly all of your time outside this town. As you come to visit this town this week, what are your observations as to the political climate and what you see?
Well, it's a gray and drizzly day today in this town where I was brought up. I spent the first 17 years of my life in Washington. And the politics is, I'm an absurdist at heart, and there's nothing more absurd, really, than American politics now. As I have been saying over and over again, I must apologize to your viewer listeners. I have laryngitis. But the only subject that a mature people in a so-called republic should be interested in is who collects what money to spend on what for whom. And that's all. There isn't any private life doesn't enter into it. But as we're not allowed to talk about important things, which in this case are taxes and raising revenues, we can't talk about overruns at the Pentagon. That's out of business. Every now and then you get a story about that fighter plane, you know, that it can't go out in the rain, you know, otherwise it falls apart. You're not allowed to talk about real politics or who is bought by whom for a Senate seat, let us say. So all you've got left are private lives. It's diversionary to keep people from talking about their real interests. And each year it's worse. And something's going to break one of these days, because over half the people don't bother to vote, and they're not stupid. They figured out that we don't have representative government. If nobody's representing them, why bother to vote? This will change. I'm for going back to Philadelphia, of course. And Thomas Jefferson thought that we should revise the Constitution once a generation, every 30 years, he said. You cannot expect a man to wear a boy's jacket. Well, we're 200 years overdue for that.
There was a time where you wanted to be part of all this. You ran for the House and ran for the Senate. How old were you?
How what?
How old were you when you first, when you ran?
I was, when I ran for the House, I was 35, and it was 1960, the year that Jack Kennedy ran for president. He was a friend, and I had great pleasure in running some 20,000 votes ahead of him in upstate New York. I was serious about it then. Then in 64, the seat was mine if I wanted it, and I didn't want it. I'd gone back to writing novels. By 82, I went into the Democratic primary in California to see what was going on, really. But I can't raise money. I've never been able to ask anybody for a penny. And you need something like $25 million to be a viable candidate for the Senate in a big state like California. Well, this is obscene. So we're going to have to revise our whole political system. Let us say, take elections and do what every civilized country in the Western world at least does. Elections should not be more than 8 weeks. And you can get, and there should be no time bought by anybody, no sound bites. Programs such as this, you question the candidates. If it's national television for the federal level, city, local, state for other offices across the land, free debates, and at the same time, real questioning. Don't let them sit there with any notes. Find out what's in their heads.
This is your chance to talk with Gore Vidal, the author. This is his latest book. It's called The Smithsonian Institution, a novel. Take a look at it there. And through the course of the program, of course, we'll list the many other novels that he has written. What is this book about, very briefly?
Well, what do you mean, very briefly? Well, I'm going to talk about it at enormous length. You know?
But we do want to get the folks who are calling in. So tell us about the book.
You want to me to tell you about it?
Yes.
More or less briefly. Yes, I love this thing about television.
Sorry to
All right, well, I'm sorry, our time is up, but that was extremely interesting. And your philosophy of life again, what was it? Yes, I remember it.
Go ahead, sir.
All right, go ahead. It's about the Smithsonian Institution. This is why I call it that. And it's a 13-year-old boy in the year 1939 who's a mathematical genius. And he is summoned to the Smithsonian, which is a magical place. The exhibits come alive at night. And he is to help out with the atomic bomb as a nuclear physicist, a born genius. Einstein, at the end, realizes, it's a somewhat optimistic book for me, that the kid is the next step in human evolution, that he's not stuck with a binary brain we've all got. With 2 hemispheres, he's developing a sort of third one. And all sorts of interesting things happen. He falls in love at the age of 13 with a 21-year-old Mrs. Grover Cleveland. Now, if you hold that up, we can see Mrs. Grover Cleveland on the lawn of the Smithsonian. I believe they're disturbed over there by this, by a teenage lust on the lawn. There's the castle in the background of the Smithsonian, and an atom bomb going off, a symbol of our time. Was that brief enough?
We have a lot of folks who want to talk to you this morning.
I want to talk to them.
Let's go to Pittsburgh first on the independent line. Go right ahead, Pittsburgh. You're on with Gore Vidal.
Thank you, C-SPAN. This is a great pleasure for me, Mr. Vidal. I've read many of your books, and I have your new book. I'm up to page 54, part 3. What you said there about the end of the book being the next stage in evolution, I had come across this idea about 10 years ago. I thought this is the only hope for humanity is that it will evolve to the next stage. That's and it's odd, you know. I didn't know the end of the book until you just mentioned it here, and I was very surprised about that. But I would like to ask you about as a comment about Ronald Reagan. I always thought he was best. I mean, people like kind of laud over him and that. Put him. I always thought he was best when he went off the script, or was most dangerous.
Well, I couldn't imagine him really off the script. His head was full of all the scripts that he had played over his lifetime. He was a wondrously silly man, and at the same time extremely likable. He said in Philadelphia when he was running for president the first time when he got elected, and he had all of his notes written for him, and he was holding them outside of the city hall, and a strong wind came up, and his speech was blown away, and he said, "Well, there goes foreign affairs." He was pretty blithe about that. He was the first president who was not interested really in politics. He had a gift for it. He had charisma for the public, but he was not. He was out to lunch for 8 years. Did you see that thing recently on, oh God, what was it on? About the presidency, and they had Edmund Morris, who was writing the life of, first of Theodore Roosevelt.
Public TV series.
Yeah, public TV, yeah. And he said something quite interesting. Those of us who had known Reagan over the years, and I've known him very slightly since we were both in Hollywood, at the same time, I writing, he acting. And I mean, people ran a mile, you know, when Reagan would come into a room. He just told you stories that he had picked up from the Saturday Evening Post, and he would recycle them. But Morris said something very interesting, which I hadn't thought of. He began a physical and mental decline right after he was shot, and they had to keep this from the American people. I mean, he was practically non-operative for most of his second term, certainly, and that the decline was quite tragic and quite noticeable, and beautifully covered up by Mrs. Reagan and others.
We have a call from the nation's capital, Washington, on the Democratic line. Go right ahead.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Morning.
I am so nervous, but I am so privileged and honored to be able to talk to you, sir. Really an honor. I've read everything you've ever written except for your last two novels, and I want to say I was going to buy your current novel, but I was so put off by the cover art. It just... I don't know.
I love the cover.
Well, it looked like something that would be called Ebony Love that would be available in the grocery store. But I don't want to get bogged down on that, sir. I would like to beg you, please come back to America. We need to hear your thoughts more often. I'm mainly calling to ask you, many years ago, I believe I was around 12 years old, I was watching you, I think it was during the 68 campaign, you and William F. Buckley were commenting on ABC and got into a fight on the air, which I thoroughly enjoyed at 12 years old. I was wondering if you would comment on that, and if you would also maybe consider doing a PBS program with Mr. Buckley. I find that would be fascinating. Also, sir, in my hometown, city council races, in the most recent race, a city councilman had to spend $108,000. The previous amount of money was $38,000. If you could, I'd like you to comment on all of that.
Thanks, caller.
Well, it's scandalous now, but there's no way of campaign reform funding. It's like asking the burglar as soon as he gets to the second-story window to kick away the ladder. The ladder that got him there was the money. Politics is now prohibitively expensive for anybody but great corporations, which are they pay for this peculiar single party that we have with two right wings, one called Democrat, one called Republican. I live partly in Italy and partly in the Hollywood Hills, so you can argue that I don't live in America at all. But I am still busily speaking out, though no plans with Mr. Buckley. I am forbidden by the networks to appear on prime time, particularly in an election. Every 4 years, Peter Jennings tries to get ABC to get me back, as I, with some help from Mr. Buckley, the two of us made ABC #1 in '68 in prime time. I cannot be allowed back because Jennings gets very interested. Every 4 years he has this conversation. They say, oh, well, he'll just be outrageous. And Jennings says, well, in what way? Well, they can't say what way. Well, I just said the reason. Anyone who says there's only one political party in the country, the party of property, the party of corporations, and they pay for the Democrats, they pay for the Republicans, you can't say that on prime time. First of all, where's the horse race? What difference does it make who's elected? Who's going to switch on the box? So certain voices are kept off the air. I was talking to Jerry Brown the other day. We've become friends since I ran against him in '82. And he was governor of California, as you know, for 8 years. And I said, have you ever been on Ted Koppel? And he said, yes, once. Now, here's a guy who's ran the biggest state for 8 years. I said, well, how was it? He said, well, he asked me, did I think that campaigns cost too much? And I said, yes. And I said, that was it? He said, that was it. I was on about 40 seconds. Well, I was asked on when Gorbachev came to the United Nations, and I was filmed at home in Los Angeles, and what do you think Gorbachev will say tomorrow? And I said, he's going to talk about unilateral disarmament on the part of the Soviet Union. So I turn on the program that night, see myself. They got Tom Clancy to take my place. You can't trust them Reds. You know them Reds, they're awful people. That's the level of television at the national level. Voices like mine cannot be heard, and with my current laryngitis, I'm just as glad.
Garner, North Carolina, you're calling on the Republican line?
Yes.
You're on with Gore Vidal. Go right ahead.
Mr. Vidal, with regard to the speech that ran just before you appeared on there, you said there's no truth in the First Amendment. Why does the whole thing start with, we hold these truths to be self-evident?
Well, that was not the start of the First Amendment. That was Mr. Jefferson's gloss upon the reasons that we should create a new nation and make our separation from the motherland, from Great Britain. Truth is, first of all, Pontius Pilate said the first and last word on what is truth. It is highly relative and depends upon what people will agree upon at any given time. The First Amendment is about the freedom of speech. Most speech is untrue, either deliberately or just through plain ignorance. And if Mr. Starr thinks it's about truth or the pursuit of truth, he has no notion of what the First Amendment means. I mean, you can say anything. I'm told that James Carville is now under indictment or whatever it is for having attacked Kenneth Starr. He has a perfect right to say that he thinks Kenneth Starr is a bum or misguided or untrue. We all have that right. That's the First Amendment. So to say piously, oh, it's about telling the truth. Well, it isn't about telling the truth. It is about liberty.
Have a fax here. What are your views regarding the war on drugs? Is the federal prohibition of drugs constitutional? Isn't the crime associated with the use of drugs actually the result of prohibition? And don't you think most of this crime would vanish if adults were free to acquire their drugs of choice from liquor stores or similar outlets?
Yes, I totally agree with what the fax says. However, the faxer is far too intelligent for our society at this moment. We love to have sin, which we can then demonize and illegalize. It is no business of the state. John Stuart Mill made this point very clearly, that no state has the right to prohibit people from doing what they want to do as long as it does no harm to others. No state has the right to make you be healthy, to stop smoking or drinking or taking drugs. It's a marvelous means of control of the people. And that's what these prohibitions are about. You invent prohibitions. From 1919 to 1933, we prohibited alcohol. We had a crime wave such as the nation had never seen. And we've had no respect for law since then. The prohibition of drugs is just wonderful. particularly of such unimportant things as marijuana, for God's sake. There are people serving life terms in prison, 3 times caught. So I would say that to legalize all of them, turn it over to the doctors in the cases of serious drug addicts, and get the cops out of it, because you'll also get crime out of it, which is extremely important. There's no money in drugs. Nobody's going to peddle them. As
you look at this town, is there a single most important issue that you follow that is on your mind these days?
Well, the general absurdity of the press. And I thought that, this is falling out of my ear, but...
I think it's okay now.
But who listens, you know? The absurdity of the press. And I think it's wonderful that with all of the nonsense about Clinton's sex life, there is 80% of the people are for him because they realize it has nothing to do with executing the office of president, in which he seems reasonably competent. So the press got that one quite wrong, and Congress, of course, is living in cloud cuckoo land. I mean, they're representing the right-wing interests that put them there, and rather corporate interests, we should say.
We have time. I'm sorry, did you want to...
No.
Oh, sorry to cut you off there.
No, I'm just thinking about my ear. With this thing
we'll get it fixed. We're going to take a look at some of your books here while we take a call from Coral Springs, Florida, on the Independent line. Go right ahead. You're on with Gore Vidal.
Mr. Vidal, what a huge pleasure it is to speak to you. You are as erudite and brilliant as any writer on the scene. As far as politics goes, don't get involved. You're so above it and beyond it, it would just drag you down to its level, which would be a tremendous shame. It's so ironic that I see you on TV, because myself, being on the cusp of modern literature as I am, I just got finished reading Burr and 1876 Now, even though you wrote them almost 25 years ago. And I think they were just so great. I wanted to ask you, of all the millions of things I wanted to ask you, what I would feel like asking you, that I know you don't have the time to talk about, one question: was, in fact, Martin Van Buren Aaron Burr's illegitimate son, or is that just done for the book?
Well, no one will ever know. Where I got that from was the diaries of John Quincy Adams, who was serving in the Senate when Martin Van Buren came to the Senate from New York. And J.Q. Adams said there is a marked resemblance, I'm just paraphrasing, between Martin Van Buren and his alleged, or whatever adjective he used, father Aaron Burr. I checked all the dates, and he could have been the father of Martin Van Buren. The Van Burens had in Claverack, near Claverack in Columbia County, New York, where I used to live, a tavern, and Burr was on circuit as a lawyer, and Mrs. Van Buren was a lady that he might well have wanted to seduce, and Matty Van, as he was known, might well have been the son. One bit of circumstantial evidence: when Burr came back from France, where he'd been in exile, Van Buren was about to be governor of New York, and Van Buren took him in. Now, this was the most cautious politician that ever lived, and to take in Aaron Burr meant that you were, well, he was throwing caution to the winds, because Burr was being treated like Benedict Arnold. So I think there's probably something in it.
We go to Kenner, Louisiana, back to the Democratic line. Thanks for hanging on. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, Mr. Vidal. It's a pleasure to talk to you. You seem to be very well informed and unbiased, and just tell it like it is. My question to you, sir, is what do you think of the phenomenon of the religious right back in the Republican Party, which basically I see the party of the corporations, with the exception of the Blue Dog Democrats? The phenomenon of back in the social agenda, while at the same time the Republicans, and I look at Ronald Reagan's administration, Bush administration, the redistribution of wealth in this country, the human suffering that is caused, the families that have broken up as a result of financial problems, no one at home to watch the children, two income families. And I consider this very immoral. While my entire family backs the Christian Coalition, I think I'm the only dissenter in the group, and I say, basically there's straining gnats and swallowing elephants.
Well, keep up the good work. I believe in the First Amendment, as we were discussing earlier, and the Christian right has every right to organize itself and join the Republican Party and vote for the return of slavery and all the good things that they missed. But the way to tame them, I would remove their tax exemption. This is where they cause the mischief. There are not that many of them. But they go on television, and I'm here, the Lord is here, come, you press that set, you press that set, I will cure you of your pellagra. You send that check into me, you send that check into me. All that money that shyster is getting from television and from the churches is tax exempt. Now, we have a deal with them. We thought we had, the seculars of the country, that they stay out of politics. This is church money. They go, Pat Robertson, they go out, they form great coalitions, they form parties, they make the difference in elections. I want every tax dollar that goes to every church, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish temple, Muslim, to be taxed. And I'm not talking about just the little white church at the corner of Elm and Main Street. I'm talking about the huge portfolios which go to back the darkest forces in the United States. And that can be done by an act of Congress. So work on that one.
A couple of other faxes here. Who is this Gore Vidal? I must admit I've never read any of his novels, but I might now. He's like a thinking woman's Will Buckley. Pompous, affected, funny. There's only one difference. Vidal is smart, in capital letters. Another one here. Sir, you are a national treasure. Norman Mailer stated on the Paula Jones, Jennifer Flowers, and Monica Lewinsky events that the main difference between President Kennedy and President Clinton is that Kennedy had better taste in women. Please comment.
Well, that is a very sexist thing to say. I'm now turning into Richard M. Nixon before your eyes, you know. Kennedy had a lot better luck. After all, his father had owned Paramount Pictures. He got to meet a lot of movie stars, as did his father before him. As for this current phenomenon about Clinton, it isn't of the slightest importance, but it's being made into that. You always go after people for something of no importance when in the back of your mind you have a serious agenda, which is he's being punished. He did something that you cannot do to the ruling class of the country, the corporations that govern us. He tried to give the people national health care. Now, the insurance companies take 1/3 of all the money we spend on health individually. The insurance companies are the piggy bank of the great corporations. They don't want to give up this money. The Clintons naively went in there thinking. Then they decided to give the Clintons the works. They're going to so blacken their characters. We're going to hear the president is a necrophile. You'll see him coming out of a mortuary with a big grin. They're going to smear him with everything. Is this because they're against the Clintons? Not really. It's to scare every politician in the country so nothing will ever be done with our tax money for the people at large except weapons for defense.
Gore Vidal, thank you very much for joining us this morning for this half hour. Here is the new book, once again, Gore Vidal, the Smithsonian Institution, a novel, your first visit to the Washington Journal. Appreciate your time this morning.
Good. Thank you very much.